Let me welcome everybody, and before we get started, I want to recognize Congressman Stauber from the great state of Minnesota, who to lead us in the pledge and the prayer.
Dear Lord, thanks for this wonderful day. Thanks for bringing us together. Thanks for the leadership of our ranking member and our chairman today as we do the people's business. Lord, we thank you for the safe travels of our witnesses to come here and testify, give us their experience. And we pray for all of our staff who work so hard behind the scenes to help us all become successful. We are one United States of America, and we shall never forget that. In your name we pray. Amen. Amen. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, good morning to everyone, and I now call the Committee on Small Business to order. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time. I now recognize myself for my opening statement. Welcome to today's hearing, Fueling America's Future, How Investment Empowers Small Business Growth. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. Many of you have traveled a long way to share your experience and perspectives, and we deeply value your time and your voice. When small business succeed, America succeeds. Small businesses excel when they have access to the capital needed for growth on terms that support them. Today's hearing will focus on the essential role of private capital and public-private partnerships in small business investment. Given the tightening of bank lending standards and the persistence of high interest rates from the Biden's disastrous economic policies, creating investment opportunities for small businesses is more valuable today than ever before. Thankfully, under the leadership of President Donald Trump, Main Street America is more hopeful than ever. President Trump is bringing back American manufacturing, cutting regulatory red tape, revitalizing small business, and supporting American investment. By prioritizing economic growth over the political agendas, we are unleashing capital back into the hands of job creators and innovators and filling a new era of prosperity that strengthens Main Street and empowers small business owners. Renewed optimism in America's next golden age is inspiring greater investment in small business, which drives entrepreneurship and American innovation. These private investment will fuel business growth, creating opportunities for strategic guidance, mentorship, and industry connections. In addition to private investment, small business can also seek out public-private partnerships. The SBA's Small Business Investment Companies Program, known as the SBIC program, demonstrates how the government partnering with private investors and following the private sector to make investment decisions stimulates innovation, strengthens domestic supply chains, and enhances national security. SBICs are privately owned companies that are licensed and regulated by the SBA. SBICs raise private capital to invest in small businesses through debt and equity. The SBA doesn't invest directly in SBICs, but supplements private capital with government-backed funds to strengthen support for small business. My friend and colleague, Congressman Dan Muser, from the great state of Pennsylvania, introduced a bipartisan bill, the Investing in All of America Act of 2025, to expand access to capital through SBICs for small business and manufacturing, critical technology industries in rural areas. I look forward to working across the aisle with the Senate to move this bill forward. When investors support business growth and businesses generate returns for investors, and the business itself creates a cycle of success that strengthens America's economy and propels Main Street toward economic success. With that, I will yield to our distinguished and my friend, ranking member from New York, Ms. Velasquez, for her opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a very important and timely hearing, and I want to thank all the witnesses for being here this morning. Today is Liberation Day, the day President Trump said he plans to roll out a set of tariffs that he promises will free the United States from foreign goods. In anticipation of today, our public markets slipped again yesterday in another volatile day of trading. The uncertainty surrounding the president's tariff policies has put our public markets on a roller coaster ride. On Monday, the S&P 500 touched a 6-month low. For the first quarter, the index lost 4.6%, while the NASDAQ composite dropped 10%. That marked the worst quarterly performance for both benchmarks since 2022. The Dow has dropped 1.3% during the first 3 months of the year. With confidence in our public markets never shakier, it is vital that our private markets step up and facilitate financing to our nation's small businesses. Traditionally, small businesses have been more reliant on bank financing to their credit needs than large businesses. But as we will explore today, in recent years, small employers have increasingly relied on private forms of investment and credit to meet their financing needs. The SBIC program is a responsible and effective method for small businesses and startups to partner with private equity investors. Currently, the SBA partners with more than 300 privately owned and managed SBICs to provide financing to small businesses with private capital the SBIC has raised through an SBA guarantee debenture. As of 2024, the SBIC program has made more than 194,000 investments and deployed more than $130 billion of capital to small businesses. Under the Biden-Harris administration, the SBA created 2 new types of SBIC, the accrual and reinvestor SBIC, and made important updates to the program. I look forward to discussing how these changes have streamlined and modernized the program. More broadly, private funds like private equity, private credit, and venture funds have become a critical source of financing for small firms, particularly those that need retooling or just on the cusp of growth. For example, the private equity industry invested in 18,000 businesses in 2022, 40% of which had fewer than 50 employees. Likewise, private credit funds facilitated loans to 3,600 companies in 2022 and tend to serve small to middle market businesses with 150 employees or fewer. So, while there is no doubt that the role private funds play in the American economy is significant, these funds can also present serious risks for small businesses, their employees, and their community. It is important to note these funds have drawn significant criticism over the years for the strategies they at times choose to employ. Unlike conventional bank loans, the research unfortunately demonstrates that women and minority-owned and small businesses outside a certain geographic area have less access to private funds than their counterparts. For example, Black and Hispanic female entrepreneurs receive less than 1% of all venture capital investment in 2020. I look forward to exploring all these issues and more to ensure our private markets are appropriately regulated, transparent, and working for the long-term benefit of our small businesses and their employees, especially at a time when federal agencies are losing critical staff and funding. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Lady yields back, and I will now introduce our witnesses. Our first witness here with us today is Mr. Brett Palmer. Mr. Palmer has served as president of the Small Business Investor Alliance in Washington, D.C. since 2008. Prior to that, Mr. Palmer worked as the managing director of government relations at the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. Before joining the SBIA, Mr. Palmer also served as an assistant secretary for legislative affairs and deputy assistant secretary for trade legislation at the Department of Commerce. He served in several roles in the House, including as a policy aide to former Speaker Newt Gingrich. Mr. Palmer holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from Davidson College. And I want to thank you for being here today and taking time to let us hear your conversation with us. Our next witness here with us today is Bill Baumel. Bill has served as the managing director of the Ohio Innovation Fund in Columbus, Ohio since 2016. He spent more than 20 years as a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley before bringing his experience back to Ohio. Outside of the Ohio Innovation Fund, Mr. Baumel serves as director at multiple companies, including Aware, Sterling, Ultracord, and others. In addition, Mr. Baumel is an investor and advisor at Immuta and Enable Injections, Trace 3D, and Script Drop, to name a few. He is also a member of the National Venture Capital Association. Mr. Baumel holds a Master of Business Administration from the University of Michigan and a Bachelor of Science in Accounting and Economics from the Ohio State University. So who do you root for on Saturday? That's the question. So thanks for joining us today, and we look forward to our conversation, okay? And I now recognize the ranking member from New York, Ms. Velasquez, to briefly introduce our last witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to introduce and welcome Mr. Anthony Cimino to the committee. Mr. Cimino is Vice President and Head of Policy at Carta, a private markets infrastructure company that provides equity management and valuation services for more than 45,000 companies and fund administration services for 6,500 fund and fund vehicles. Prior to Carta, Mr. Cimino worked on policy for trade associations, focused on driving capital to more people, more entrepreneurs, and more businesses. In addition, Mr. Cimino served as a senior staff for the Committee on Financial Services during the financial crisis and the committee's work on Dodd-Frank Act. Mr. Cimino has an MBA from Johns Hopkins and an undergraduate degree from UCLA. Mr. Cimino, thank you for joining us here this morning.
Lady yields back, and thank you to all of you again. We appreciate all of you being here today. So before I recognize the witnesses, I'd like to remind them that their oral testimony is restricted to 5 minutes in length. Now, if you see the light turn on in front of you, it means your 5 minutes is up, and it's concluded, and you need to wrap it up quick. And if you don't, you're going to hear this, okay? And that means it's over, all right? And also one other thing I want to say, we have a lot of other hearings going on today, so you may see a lot of the committee, including the ranking member and myself, get up, leave, come back. Has nothing to do with your testimony. It's just that we got a lot going on today.
We have a markup.
We have a markup.
Financial services.
We do. And that's a long thing to do, right? If you'll keep it short, we'll get through quicker.
We'll see.
Okay. And I now recognize Mr. Brett Palmer for his 5-minute opening remarks.
Good morning, Chairman Williams and Ranking Member Velasquez and members of the committee. Thank you for holding this hearing. My name is Brett Palmer. I'm president of the Small Business Investor Alliance, and our mission is to maintain a robust, healthy, and competitive market for small business investing right here in the United States. SBIA was formed in 1958 to represent small business investment companies, America's original venture capital and private equity funds. Prior to SBICs, the only source of equity capital for new or growing businesses were corporations and the 3 F's of capital access: family, fools, and friends. President Eisenhower knew we could do better than the 3 F's, and for our small businesses, he created the SBICs to kickstart a new private capital market that is now the envy of the world. It's hard to believe it, but it's true. The federal government created what we now call the venture capital industry with the establishment of the SBICs. And for nearly 70 years, SBICs have been a critical part of getting institutional capital to small businesses that are often overlooked by the biggest financial firms or in the most concentrated population areas. SBICs are an American success story, an example of successful public policy that aligns the power of private markets with the public interest of job creation and economic growth. While some small businesses don't want to grow, that's fine. But some small businesses do, and that's what we want to do, is we want to help them grow, because when they do grow, they need outside capital and they need outside experts to help them scale up, because sometimes it's called a valley of death from going from small to medium. The only way to be a successful SBIC is to find those smaller businesses and help them grow into bigger, better, more resilient businesses. Because SBICs are only able to make a profit by successfully growing the small businesses, they cannot cut their way to profitability. They have to grow it. There are icons of American industry, including Federal Express, Apple, Intel, Callaway Golf, and many others that have received SBIC capital when they were small and when they were young. These companies are recognized globally, but most small businesses backed by SBICs simply grow into robust, middle-sized businesses. They never go public, but they succeed. The Library of Congress did a study a couple years ago. When they looked at it, they found that SBIC investments that were debt-oriented grew small business employment by about 150 jobs per small business. And for equity investments into those small businesses, it was about 350 new jobs. Those are really big numbers for small businesses. And the study found that when they looked back, the SBICs created about 3 million new jobs across those small businesses. That's really powerful. And while some of these small businesses are high-tech world changers that I mentioned, most are doing the services or manufacturing the products that are invisible on the national stage, but they make our economy robust and they make their communities stronger. For example, Builders Buyers Group in Representative Skolton's district, they help independent home builders lower costs by helping them buy products at scale to compete with national builders and get better pricing. Since the SBIC investment, revenue and earnings have increased by more than 125%. Another is Advanced Industries in Representative Alford's districts. It's a small manufacturer of complex containers, some of which are used by DoD. Since their investment at the depth of pandemic, they've grown employment by over 16%, from Peachtree City to Oakland, to Mission, Kansas, to Hardinsburg, Kentucky, to Winona and Hayfield, Minnesota, to Odessa, Missouri, to Cornwall, Pennsylvania, and Appleton, Wisconsin. They're small businesses, and particularly small manufacturers, that are able to grow. To put it in the simplest terms, SBIC funds are private investment vehicles that pool capital from institutional investors like pension funds and endowments, and then they use SBA leverage to invest in those small businesses. So the private capital leads, and the SBA leverage follows and amplifies. It's 100% small business, 100% domestic, with a lot of investments in manufacturing and in low-income areas, all of which is done at zero subsidy to the taxpayer. Because access to capital is a key to growth for small businesses, and will always be a challenge to small businesses. Scale is real. It's a challenge for everyone. And traditionally, as the ranking member pointed out, banks help finance small businesses that have a stable revenue history and assets to borrow against. Unfortunately, a lot of newer businesses and smaller businesses, particularly low-income areas and rural areas are generally low-income areas, tend to have more difficulty accessing traditional sources of capital and credit because they don't have the balance sheet of big businesses and they're seen as too risky. This is where SBICs fill the gap by changing the balance sheets and being the first institutional capital deployed into many small businesses. Once the SBIC capital is invested into a small business, then the small business is able to access conventional bank capital. With SBICs, small businesses can access the capital markets in a similar way to big businesses. And the SBA is doing interesting things with DoD. There's a strategic partnership to license critical technology SBICs. These funds are designed to support critical national security industries and supply chains to compete with other countries around the world who are being very aggressive as far as what they're doing with their economies versus ours. And demand for SBIC capital is such that SBICs are looking at 400 to 500 individual small businesses before they invest in a single one. The demand for the capital is real, and it's there. And there are about 100 new SBICs forming, representing about $20 billion new dollars in small business investment that's going to help fill this ongoing gap. This market has grown dramatically for private credit, private equity, venture and venture lending. And I thank the committee for having this hearing, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
I now recognize Mr. Baumel for his 5-minute opening remarks.
Chairman Williams, Ranking Member Velasquez, and distinguished members of the U.S. Committee on Small Business, thank you for the opportunity to discuss an issue vital to our country's prosperity, empowering America's entrepreneurship. I graduated from Ohio State in Michigan. My first venture capital startup investment was based in Bemidji, Minnesota, the first company to provide fiber-to-the-home systems that bundle voice, video, and data services in underserved rural areas. I continue to invest and partner with founders across a variety of sectors, from groundbreaking health technologies like the first continuous glucose monitor for diabetics, to cutting-edge data security solutions used by global giants like Starbucks, Walmart, Chevron, Citigroup, General Motors, and the U.S. Air Force. Over the years, many of the startups I've worked with have gone public or been acquired by companies like NVIDIA, Intuit, Medtronic, Dell, and Oracle. I have worked 15 years in Silicon Valley and Boston, and 15 years in the Midwest, partnering with hundreds of entrepreneurs to navigate the challenging journey of scaling a startup. Currently, I run the Ohio Innovation Fund, a venture capital firm founded in 2016, specializing in sectors like software, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and biotech. Our portfolio companies form partnerships with industry leaders like Sanofi, Roche Genentech, Eli Lilly, Samsung, Dell, ServiceNow, and Snowflake, with many of the Fortune 500 and leading medical institutions as clients or clinical trial partners. At Ohio Innovation Fund, we provide the real-world experience and market insights that startups need to succeed, offering guidance on business strategy, product development, financing, and team building. Many of the entrepreneurs we work with in the Midwest are first-time founders, relying on our expertise to realize their startup's full potential. For example, we partner with Sterling Ultra Cold, a company based in Appalachian, Ohio, manufacturing ultra-low temperature freezers for leading biopharma companies. Our support helped them scale to 100 million annual shipments, and many of the original investors and employees became millionaires. And now they are local angel investors, which is contributing to a cycle of wealth creation and reinvestment in Appalachia. eFuse, a leading esports software platform, was founded by a college intern we mentored. In only 5 years, eFuse has grown to tens of millions in revenue, partnering with companies like Epic Games and Activision, with influencers, investors such as Odell Beckham Jr. and Tim Tebow's Waterstone Impact Fund. Founder Matt Benson says, "Bill mentored me, offering both strategic guidance and invaluable access to his networking expertise. I'm living in proof of the impact OAF makes by empowering the next generation of innovators." OAF worked with Aware, a cybersecurity company leading to an acquisition by Mimecast, which has established an AI hub in Columbus to provide enhanced and new innovative solutions to their combined 40,000-plus customers, creating jobs and expanding opportunities for our local community. Aware founder Jeff Schuman, head of AI strategy at Mimecast, says, "OAF's world-renowned go-to-market expertise and hands-on collaborative approach was like bringing a superhero onto our team, equipping us with unparalleled power and capability." Bank funding is not an option for most startups. So early-stage venture funding, partnering with public capital sources, such as those from the Small Business Administration, is essential. For Clarimedix's CEO, without venture support from OAF and public funding sources like Carbex and the National Institute of Health, their groundbreaking biotherapies would not have reached clinical trials. This partnership enabled them to advance collaboration with a major biopharma company. Beyond supporting startups, we're committed to helping seed the next generation of entrepreneurs. Each year, we engage with hundreds of students through internships, boot camps, and mentoring, helping them gain practical experience to connect with the startup world. Many go on to join top firms like Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and Anduril, but many more stay in the Midwest VC ecosystem, including at Ohio Innovation Fund and our companies, contributing to the growth of the next wave of innovators. Our success stories highlight the transformative potential of entrepreneurship outside traditional hubs. It's critical to continue fostering innovation in areas like Ohio, where capital is limited and ecosystems are still developing. State resources also play a key role. For example, Sterling Ultra Cold partnered with Jobs Ohio to receive capital to help scale up those manufacturing operations to allow them to grow to $100 million in revenue over a couple of years. In conclusion, the success of entrepreneurs depends on a combined effort from venture capital, federal government support, and state resources. Together, we can provide the resources and guidance needed to create a high-growth business that will drive the economy forward. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to discussing how we can work together to improve capital access and empower entrepreneurs across the United States.
Thank you very much. And now we recognize Mr. Anthony Cimino for his 5-minute opening remarks.
Chairman Williams, Ranking Member Velasquez, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on expanding investment in the role of the SBA. I'm proud to be here on behalf of Carta, a company that serves as the infrastructure for private capital. Carta provides equity management and valuation services for 50,000 private companies and their employees. We provide fund accounting, portfolio management, and investor reporting for approximately 7,000 funds. Our end-to-end platform connects private capital, ultimately supporting the development of this ecosystem. Startups and small businesses and the private capital that backs them are this nation's economic and innovation engine. This ecosystem has created 70% of net new jobs since 2019. It accounts for half of U.S. economic activity, and it spurs innovation. Over the past 50 years, the U.S. has started twice as many companies as the rest of the G7 combined. This is what has provided our nation its competitive edge and, importantly, led to more opportunities for more Americans. But to start and grow a business, to contribute to this economic dynamism, startups and small businesses need access to capital. It is a gating issue. And for many entrepreneurs, traditional financing is not available. Banks typically do not lend against an idea or an unproven product in an unproven market. That is where private capital steps in. Private capital provides entrepreneurs and small businesses with long-term, risk-forward capital to launch and build companies. The company gets a check, and the investors get a stake in the business. But these investments are more than a check. These funds become strategic and operational partners, helping these companies succeed. In broad terms, venture capital helps turn a concept into a company, and private equity can help it grow and mature. And yes, the private capital ecosystem is growing, but it is still too concentrated. Capital is the lifeblood of small businesses, but these funds are flowing to specific regions and to select communities. To illustrate this point, California companies attracted half of all venture investments last year. Even in New York, which attracted approximately 11% of venture funding, the bulk of that capital hit places like Manhattan, not necessarily places like Brooklyn. This disparity in access is even more stark when you examine it across the broader country. So our collective charge is to change this. We must not merely bolster this economic engine, but broaden it. Broaden it to more people, to more investors, to more companies, to more communities. And to do this, we need to expand the investor ecosystem into more regions. Regional capital can create regional economic hubs. This starts the flywheel. Emerging and regional managers tend to invest early, invest locally, and invest diversely. These investors back entrepreneurs in the region, and these entrepreneurs launch and build companies, which attract employees to the region. These employees earn income, develop skills, further broadening the ecosystem in which to invest and on which to build. It all starts with the investors that increase access to capital, and policy can help drive this to more places in the country. First, we should build on the success of the SBIC program. This program enables proven investment managers to tap more capital to invest in startups and small businesses, all while being a strong steward of taxpayer resources. The SBIC's recent enhancements to allow accrual debenture and reinvestor offerings will align more with venture-focused funds and put more money into the ecosystem. SBICs are making a difference, and we support ensuring the SBIC has the operational capacity to support this program and even more stakeholders to engage with it. Second, we should continue to improve the SBIC program. The Bipartisan Investing in All of America Act does just that. This legislation incentivizes capital deployment to overlooked and underserved rural areas and into the national security sector. Driving investment into these segments is in the national interest, both unlocking more economic growth and helping us maintain our global competitive edge. Third, we can do more to broaden employee ownership. Expanding ownership helps attract, retain, and align talent with the businesses, ultimately helping them thrive. And for employees, ownership enables them to participate in the profits they're helping build, as well as have access to an uncapped upside. And importantly, for the community, employee ownership makes it likely that these small businesses will continue to operate and create economic growth even after an entrepreneur retires. American ingenuity is not limited to certain areas and people. Unfortunately, capital, and consequently some of that opportunity, remains too concentrated. Policy can help change that, expanding access to capital to more small businesses and more communities. Carta looks forward to supporting this committee's effort. I thank the committee and the staff that worked tirelessly on these issues and look forward to answering any of your questions.
Thank you very much, and we will now move to member questions under the 5-minute rule. I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Palmer, strengthening domestic manufacturing and investing in critical technologies are the key to enhancing economic competitiveness and national security. However, small businesses, especially those in rural communities, often struggle to access the funds needed to scale innovative manufacturing operations. President Trump and SBA Administrator Loeffler have taken immediate action to return manufacturing to America. Through SBA's Putting American Manufacturing First initiative, small businesses are put in the driver's seat of the resurgence. Infusing investments and other support into small business manufacturers will bring the golden age of America to us. Small business investment companies play a critical role in investing in areas and industries that have fewer investment opportunities. So, Mr. Palmer, can you speak to how SBIC investments support the revitalization of American manufacturing and rural communities? Sure.
Manufacturing is important. It's important nationally. It's important to SBICs. It's important to our national security. It's important to our economy. Our manufacturing base has to constantly be reinvented. We have new manufacturers need to be created, but we also need to take the manufacturing base that we have and take it to the next level with new technologies, new efficiencies, new markets, and that's done commonly through SBICs. SBICs invest in old metal benders and reinvent them. And take them to the next level. SBIC investments fail very rarely. They overwhelmingly succeed. And that manufacturing is a key part of that. The Department of Defense partnership with the SBA is a really good idea. It's long overdue. I'm surprised we didn't come up with this 30 years ago. But they're working, the DoD is collaborating very closely with the SBA to make sure that the small businesses that are doing these industries that are important to our manufacturing and to our global competitiveness, not just from a government contracting perspective, but just industries we want here and not in China, for example, that they can access that capital. And that's what the SBICs are doing with DoD.
I want to follow up on that. Your SBICs have been engaging with the Department of Defense Office of Strategic Capital to attract private investment into technologies critical to national security. So can you tell us a little bit about how SBIC investments help boost America's national security?
Sure. The best, just like in sports, the best defense is a good offense. Just keep keeps putting points on the board on the other team. We've got to constantly be putting points on the board economically to our country, being a dynamic economy that's not rigid, that's constantly reinventing itself, and that's what the SBICs are doing. And they're doing it in areas that are related to the computer industry, related to the manufacturing of metals that could used in defense industries, that you could use in avionics for satellites and communications. It's all integrated, and it's also all used by civilians too. We have to have both. They're not a separated economy, and that's what the SBICs are connecting.
One more quick follow-up. What steps can Congress take to enhance SBIC's ability to invest in America's small businesses?
Well, I think the Investing in All of America Act by Congressman Muser and Skolton is really critical because it creates an incentive, not a financial incentive, but a investment incentive to invest in areas that have sometimes been forgotten or passed over, and particularly for industries like manufacturing, it has a piece in there. So I think that would be the best thing this committee could do.
Okay, Mr. Baumel, in the time I've got remaining, just over 2 months, the Trump administration has already helped push $2 trillion into private investment in the United States, and these investments are important to help businesses grow as we enter the golden age of America. So last Congress, we heard from small businesses about the barriers they face when looking to attract investors, particularly in rural communities again. So, Mr. Baumel, you choose to create your investment fund in Ohio rather than California. And how has that decision helped to find investment opportunities that may have been overlooked, and what can be done to better connect the types of businesses you invest in with the investors throughout America?
I mean, there is just as much talent in Ohio.
Microphone.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, thank you. There's just as much talent in Ohio, Pennsylvania, all the different states in the Midwest as there is in Massachusetts, Boston, or in Silicon Valley. The main thing is empowering, enabling them, and bringing the expertise, and that's what Ohio Innovation Fund brings. And so we've done that, particularly in rural areas. I mentioned Sterling Ultra Cold before. That's an advanced manufacturing company. Advanced manufacturing was kind of a necessary thing to do in the past, a lot of times outsourced. Manufacturing is now a strategic advantage. And to Ranking Member Velasquez's comment, that also, by doing that in rural areas, we actually partner with community colleges, we partner with local universities, and train the next generation of advanced manufacturing personnel, to go in those areas. But the opportunities, whether that be in biotech, cybersecurity, data science, and all the different areas, are just as strong in Ohio as anywhere else. Money and expertise.
My time is up, and I would say don't forget Texas.
Sorry about that, sir.
Okay, thank you. I now recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cimino, can you explain why the SBIC program remains an important source of investment financing for so many small businesses and startups? And can you explain how this program fulfills the statutory mission of SBA?
Yeah, thank you for the question. When we look at most entrepreneurs, in many cases, they couldn't even access traditional financing. So unless they were independently wealthy, many of them would only be able to build those ideas at incumbent companies. So private capital itself is so critical to unlocking more people to become entrepreneurs and build small businesses, ultimately driving much of this economic growth. So the first part is the availability of that loan. The next piece is working with these fund managers in ways that can get customizable arrangements, whether that's equity or debt, that more aligns with the business, and then becoming strategic partners. Where SBICs come in is, in many cases, broadening that reach. Because as I mentioned, 50% of the capital went to California on the venture side. When you look at the SBIC program, only 10% of the capital went to California. That means 90% of that is going into the areas of the country that the traditional funders weren't. And this is exactly what SBIC is doing. It's taking that professional manager and giving more access to capital for more entrepreneurs.
Thank you. Mr. Baumel, I heard you mentioning the investment that have been made through the SBICs in places like Kentucky, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Minnesota. I didn't hear even New York or Brooklyn.
As a New
Was
Yorker,
that a slip?
no, no. As a native New Yorker, I apologize
Okay.
to my New York brethren. I know New York is a huge area for SBICs, and it's all over the place. I was mentioning that just because when people think of investment, they think of New York,
Yeah.
they think of Chicago, they think of San Francisco. They don't necessarily think of Maryland or Minnesota, and so I was trying to just be
I was just
inclusive, but
teasing you.
I apologize.
Mr. Palmer, reinvestor SBICs are an often overlooked SBIC type that is based on a fund of funds model that uses the accrual, debenture, and 2 times tiers of leverage to reach more underserved community. Can you explain how the reinvestor SBIC works and why it can help investment capital reach more rural and underserved communities?
Sure. No, actually, I think it's a great question because I don't get asked it very, very much, and I think people should know about it. The reinvestor model is basically a development league for new venture capital and new private equity funds to serve underserved industries like manufacturing, underserved markets like rural or low income, or other underserved in different varieties, whatever way you want to make it. Basically, it takes a SBIC, and it's a fund of funds, which is not a common term outside of finance, but the SBIC then invests in non-levered SBIC funds that are around the country that are investing in different types of businesses. So it uses the portfolio effect to distribute risk, but develops a whole next generation of investors, whether it be venture, private equity, growth equity, around the country. And it's a really market-driven development league.
Thank you. And Mr. Palmer, let me start with you on this question. With the announced plan by the SBA to cut more than 40% of the workforce, what consequences do you foresee happening to the SBIC program without the proper personnel in place to manage it, especially when the SBIC requires technical understanding about market strategy, time horizons, deal flows, and the utilization of leverage to properly manage and oversee?
Sure. The SBIC program's about $50 billion, and it's managed on about $11 million of salary. That's about 100 times more efficient than generally the private sector runs on when they're managing private equity funds. It's a really specialized skill set that's needed. It's a taxpayer protection, particularly on the licensing side, to know what you're getting into. But so far, we haven't seen any negative impacts on the SBIC side of the house yet. Again, it's early days, but it's important to maintain that section. One of the things we'd like to see is the fees that the SBICs pay stay inside the SBIC program so that we can maintain the staff that we have and even bring in other expertise.
Mr. Cimino, would you care to comment?
Yeah, I think it's really critical that we double down on the programs that are working. This is a public-private partnership that's driving capital to more entrepreneurs, and it's doing so while protecting taxpayers. That staffing to make sure that these funds are operating correctly gets at that point.
So that means that a chainsaw is not the proper tool to deal with reorganization.
We recommend this program maintain its support.
I yield back.
Lady yields back. I now recognize Congressman Stauber from the great state of Minnesota for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. You know, public-private partnerships like the SBIC program pair government-backed support with private sector investment. These programs not only strengthen small businesses, but they also help secure supply chains and advance national security. Mr. Palmer, I, for one, don't mind that you mention Minnesota before you do New York. I appreciate that. It's the Midwest. A couple of things. I would tell you that you had mentioned something about the success rate when SBICs get involved. Can you kind of give me a percentage of the success rate or maybe the limited failure rate?
Well, the SBIC program runs at zero subsidy. The SBIC debenture program has run at zero subsidy for 27 years. That's a good long run. In the last 2 years, they haven't had to write off a dime of debentures there. It's been running at a surplus. We hope it continues that way. Even if the event that, look, sometimes businesses, things don't work out.
Yep.
in the unlikely event that happens, everything's covered by fees paid by the SBIC fund to protect the taxpayer. So the SBICs, again, on average, add about 150 new jobs for a debt offering of private credit and about 350 for equity. Those are really big numbers for small businesses. It's very unusual to have a strikeout in the SBIC world.
And so, can you explain a little bit more of the SBICs? They've been used to support manufacturers in underserved or rural communities like the one I represent. And what more can we do to the outreach? I love when you talk about 90% of the venture capitalists go to the coastal elites. But what about in the heartland? This is the SBICs come to the heartland. Are we doing a good job of that? And what can we do even better?
Well, Minnesota has a very large number of SBICs. And actually, the chairwoman of my board in, I think, 3 years will be from Minnesota. And you actually, excuse me if I butcher the name, is it Baudette?
Baudette.
You have a pharmaceutical manufacturer that's backed by an SBIC up there. I think the key is you have to have, geographic diversity matters because proximity matters, and also sizes. You have to allow for small SBICs as well as big SBICs because, you have different check sizes that are needed for different places. And so the program has grown from, when I started in 2008, from about $2 billion in capital between private capital and SBA leverage to nearly $50 billion today. And it's done that at zero subsidy. That's continuing. I think that there's massive room for more growth in that. And I think the licensing is helpful. They just licensed their first fund in North Dakota. They've just given their first green light to a fund in Mississippi. They're forming funds in Kentucky. We have a number of them in Texas. Sorry, I left out Texas earlier, Mr. Chairman. But, we can and should have more.
Take Minnesota over Texas. You can say that first. I'm okay. Is that okay, Mr. Chair?
Whatever you say.
So this is really good news. So this is, as a small business committee, this is where we need to invest more of, as the gentleman, Mr. Cimino said, we need to invest where things are working and reduce the investment where they're not, the return on the investment isn't
This
there.
is working.
Mr. Baumel, what advantages have you seen in investing in businesses outside the traditional coastal hubs? And what more can be done to connect investors with small businesses in regions like your Central Ohio or my Northern Minnesota?
Yeah. As I mentioned, my first investment was in Bemidji, Minnesota, Optical Solutions.
Yeah.
Since then, both coasts, I said, in Ohio. In terms of, the Midwest, the work ethic is absolutely strong. The passion is very
Could you
strong.
repeat that?
The work ethic is very, very strong.
Thank you.
There's a
I agree
Midwest
with
work
you.
ethic and a Texas work ethic.
Good one. He covered you. He covered you, Mr. Chair.
And there's a passion. Our founders not think about, in data science, what might be an interesting algorithm to write. They're running a real world problems. We have a person in the case, MD, PhD program that says, these binders of clinical studies are crazy. And trying to find them and where they are and compliance sign-offs, someone forgot, and doing multi-trial sites. Well, let's automate all this and have a nice workflow so the entrepreneurs are very passionate and they really believe in what they do. And the people don't switch. The grass isn't always greener. The people that join Midwestern startups stay and see it through. They have fortitude. They make it happen. I'm sure it's the same way in Texas. They make it happen. They're not looking for, this could be better, or this is a little bit more attractive, my options here, my options there. I will tell you, to your previous question, is we do get some people that are SBIC backed that co-invest with us, but not enough. And if in terms of doing that, though, if the regulation and compliance is reasonable, I think that will be key because I can't hire. I mean, I'm operating under hundreds of thousands of dollars in fees, which isn't much to cover staff as 6 and everything else. I can't hire a whole compliance department, and I can't go through a whole ton of regulation. It has to be reasonable.
I like that, the reasonable regulations. Mr. Chair, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize Mr. McGarvey from the great state of Kentucky for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate everybody being here today. I think we're at a fork in the road right now in our country, and we have a choice to make between tearing down or completely tearing apart these federal programs that have supported entrepreneurs and innovation for the last half century, or continuing to invest in these partnerships that have made the U.S. a leader in innovation because we want to stay a leader in innovation. Just this morning, there's an interesting, if angering and thought-provoking piece by Thomas Friedman in the New York Times about what is the future of American innovation. So I think it's really important we're talking about this today. And I think we can look at some of the successes we've had. with the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, commonly known as DARPA, housed in the Department of Defense, not only did we gain a technological advantage on the battlefield, it enabled us to have things like GPS. It enabled us to have great technologies. The internet came out of DARPA that not only did we use for defense, but have applications in all of our lives, private and in the business community. The SBIC program, the Small Business Investment Company, this has been really successful. This has helped us bring Amazon, Apple, Intel, Whole Foods, so many more American success stories, driving business, driving innovation right here in this country. I think the question we have to ask ourselves is not whether we can afford to invest in and support programs like the SBIC. Can we afford not to? And Mr. Baumel, I appreciate what you said about startups and that they're not just for the coastal elites. Now, you guys neglected to mention a Kentucky work ethic when you talked about these things, but you also went to Ohio State and Michigan, so I don't know if you can be completely trusted, but I think you are 100% correct that we must remember the heartland and not just Silicon Valley and Wall Street when looking for the next investment opportunity to invest in that next unicorn, to invest in that next business, which is going to do incredible and great things in our country. So I'll start with you, Mr. Baumel. What growth opportunities does the middle part of the country present, and how can we encourage more investors to follow your path and to invest in small businesses and startups outside of Silicon Valley?
Going back to Silicon Valley, everything started with Fairchild Semiconductor. And from there, Intel spun out, Kleiner Perkins spun out, all these things spun out. Very early on in the Midwest, in Ohio, Kentucky, and other areas, there is a huge risk for entrepreneurs to start a business if there isn't reasonable access to capital. There's a huge risk for someone to leave Procter & Gamble or Nationwide Insurance and join a startup if that startup, 80% of the time might not work out. Where do I go next? Do I try and reapply to Nationwide? So, programs that allow additional funding to come in and maybe incent people like myself. They call us boomerangs. That I was out in Silicon Valley. I've been in Boston. I've come back to do this in the heartland. We need to incent and more seasoned venture capitalists who are willing to set up shop and willing to mentor and willing to train and willing to hire. And I know, in Cincinnati, we have a number of companies, Enable Injections, that, is likely, it's not, that likely will be a unicorn type exit, providing, kind of on-body drug delivery, at home versus an IV in a clinic. Northern Kentucky, I know that a lady just set up a kind of biotech area there, and there's a lot of biotech activity happening right across, the Ohio River. But we need that capital. We need. There's myself and a few other people in Ohio. There's not much. As far as experience, there's not much. So we need more, this type of program to say, okay, we want to incent, we want to enable, we want to be somewhat user-friendly and, with the people that we're trying to incent and give capital to through the SBA programs to come and set up the venture fund and work with all of them, not make it a headache.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And this, Mr. Cimino, sure.
Just on that, I agree with everything, and we've talked about this. That first check, distance really matters. Capital is mobile, but proximity matters, and there is actually a very significant body of research about how much distance matters. But it's also about building that flywheel, which I think you've done, because what we've also seen is that a startup with the same positioning in a generic town versus that in SF has a 277% chance more likelihood that that startup grows and has an exit. And the reason that is because of talent. And so you not only need that first check, you need those SBICs and those investors continuing to build that infrastructure around it. Otherwise, as soon as that startup or small business starts growing, they are encouraged to move back to where those infrastructures exist. So it is a comprehensive problem that needs to be solved. That first check is so critical, but then it's to your point, how do we keep more investment going there?
Thank you so much. And I think this partnership is so important to innovation, to growth in American business. And if we're not doing it, other places are. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize Mr. Muser from the great state of Pennsylvania for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to our witnesses. Certainly a big fan of the SBIC, as we really all should be. We're very happy SBA Administrator Kelly Loeffler and the Trump administration are going to be focused like a laser beam on fueling small business because small business has not had a good 4 years. That needs to change. In some cases, their sales are up, but their net income is way down. And that shows in the type of tax revenue that's coming in, because tax revenue comes from profitability, and small business tax revenue is way down. You can't argue with those numbers, but we're going to work on changing that. So the SBIC plays a big role here, and it's been very, very successful. The fact is that through no subsidies and cost to taxpayers, over $130 billion is being invested in public-private partnerships, basically. So there's a lot of private sector skin in the game, and this has created great opportunities. It's a great government program, which is hard to say, right? But it is. You know, and we're talking, kind of joking about Minnesota versus New York and California and Texas, where things are booming. But the fact is that 75 to 80% of the SBIC current investments go towards urban areas. And that's primarily why, Mr. Palmer, you're well aware, and I think all of you are, that we have, that I'm introducing the Investing in All of America Act to expand beyond the cap level of 175 billion, to increase it by about 125 billion, strictly towards, or 175 million, strictly towards 125 billion wouldn't be bad too either. Towards rural investments. That's where it's designated. So it's on top of what's currently allocated, focused on manufacturing and critical technology sectors. So, Mr. Palmer, what do you think of that? How has the SBI program has been successful in their current operation, and how will the Investing in All America Act help enhance investments in Pennsylvania and in some of the more rural areas of our great nation?
I think if we get this legislation through and becomes law, I think you will see every SBIC, or nearly every SBIC, dedicate their business development teams to finding small businesses in those areas, because it is a meaningful cap that they have now and that they will continue to have. But it is, if you invest in manufacturing or if you invest in a rural area, and frankly, most new manufacturing is going to be in rural areas because of taxes, regulations, just where can you afford to buy the land to build a really big, building to put this stuff in. I think you'll see a meaningful pivot for a lot of those business development folks to get out of where they normally are and spread their deal sourcing and small business opportunity seeking to those areas, both industry-wise as well as geographically.
Mr. Baumel, do you agree? Do you think we need to expand this great lending service where there's a 2-to-1 match from the SBA to the private lenders, SBIC regulated lenders?
Anything that brings more capital to partner with the expertise and incents the expertise to be in the heartland, the better. That is about what I think on that.
All right, well, that sums it up. I like that. Do you agree, Mr. Cimino?
Cimino, I do. We support the bill, and I would just say, coupling that with some of the recent refinements we've seen from the SBIC, a la like the fund-to-fund structures, it's going to, I think, do an even better job of finding additional avenues to drive investment into rural areas and broaden this ecosystem.
Great. Would you encourage everyone on this committee, perhaps throughout Congress, to be supportive of this all-important bill?
I think that's a great idea.
All right, great. Thank you. Mr. Baumel, the SEC has estimates that going public these days costs $12 million for a business. So maybe elaborate a little bit on why these private markets are so important and such an important alternative for small businesses to raise capital.
Yeah, when I started in venture capital, even with the internet, some companies with $10, $20 million went public. Now companies need to have hundreds of millions, and in some cases billions of dollars to go public. So accessing the public markets is difficult, and the regulatory burden there is also very difficult. So growing these companies to the public market to get to that point is a now longer process, not a few years, but a decade. And therefore, that relationship is needed, and the capital is needed and expertise is needed to get them there.
Thank you all very much, and please keep up the great work.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize Mr. Cisneros of the great state of California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And look, no offense to our witnesses here today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking time out of your schedules to be here today. But we really need to have somebody from the SBA administrator, either the administrator or other staff here to be here to answer these questions, to talk about what the theme of this hearing is. Fueling America's future. We should have people from the SBA here answering those questions. And if I call on the chairman and the committee to bring in the SBA administrator, bring in SBA staff to start answering these questions. And if the SBA administrator were here today, I would ask the following questions for her. What is the extent of DOJ's access to SBA headquarters and systems, and what has been done to the SBA to ensure that systems were not abused or accessed by individuals without clearance? What specific offices of our departments within the SBA are affected by the announced 43% reduction of the workforce? And how is that going to affect SBICs? Where is the SBA relocating the 6 regional offices, and will any others be closed in the future? And how is that going to affect SBICs? How are appropriated funds being used or not used with the SBA undergoing such drastic changes that Congress has not authorized? And what is the SBA's plan to handle $1.7 trillion student loan portfolio with less staff and staff not trained to work with such a complex student loan system? So again, I call on this committee to bring in the SBA administrator, to bring in SBA staff, and let them answer the questions about what their job is going to do and how they are going to handle that job as far as dealing with small businesses across America. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize Mr. Finstead from the great state of Minnesota for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Williams, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Since the start of President Trump's administration, optimism among our nation's small business owners has soared. President Trump has put small business owners first by cutting regulations and red tape for Main Street. Southern Minnesota is home to some of the most innovative companies that do cutting-edge manufacturing to provide critical products for our nation. We are the home of great egg companies. We have counties that have more pigs than people. We are the home of Hormel. If you like Spam, you like Southern Minnesota. We are the home of the Mayo Clinic and all of the great health care and med tech innovations that come out of our district. We're really proud of that. And we also have a lot of small businesses that are working with our Department of Defense. Small businesses are the backbone of our economy in Minnesota, and we have the opportunity to craft meaningful policies to encourage investments in these businesses that produce critical goods for our nation's security, while providing stable, high-paying jobs in our communities. So with that being said, I want to talk to Mr. Baumel. Throughout your career working in numerous states, including Minnesota, happy to hear you spend some time in Bemidji, I'm sure you have worked with numerous companies that touch rural America. And as I travel around my district and around the country, specifically in rural America, you hear a lot of the same themes of, access to capital, the lack thereof. Venture capital looks at rural America as a flyover area. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about that. So with your fund, are you more likely to engage with entrepreneurs in rural communities located in middle America rather than companies located on the coast, and why is that?
Our fund does not invest on the coast to any degree, less than probably 5% of capital. So we're all within the heartland, I'll call it. Within the heartland, probably about 25 to 30% of our investments are in rural America, such as Sterling Ultra Cold in Athens, Ohio, and those sorts of things. As I mentioned previously, what we found is the entrepreneurs in those areas run into real problems, and they want to solve those. And so they create companies to do that, but they have no idea how to scale that up. The hiring, the product roadmap, the strategic partnerships, the marketing, the sales, the go-to-market, the fundraising, how to navigate SBIC, how to navigate, eventually as you become larger and profitable, bank lending, additional venture rounds. And but these entrepreneurs are also very hardworking and fortitude, but they're also very reasonable. So we have reasonable terms. We form a true partnership where everyone has equity. We have equity. They have equity. We all work together, and we're just taking a pie and trying to make it as big as possible for everyone. And what I found is when you do that, whether that's in Bemidji, within Minnesota, whether that's in Athens, Ohio, as I mentioned earlier, when there is that initial success, they catch the startup bug too. All the people, it's not just the founders, the people that work there, the people in engineering, the people in marketing, the people everywhere catch that startup bug, and they want to continue to do that. And so then they form more startups. And then, and the people that made a nice return then invest as angel investors in startups. It's kind of a cycle like that. And so I found it a very great place for innovation. It's also less competitive and less crazy. It's, keeping people focused is a lot easier in Athens and Columbus and Bemidji, Minnesota than it is in Silicon Valley. Keeping them focused on the mission, making it happen, getting success. So our returns, I mean, we're, like Sterling Ultra Cold, we sold the company for, let's say, anywhere from $200 to $400 million because it's for stock, on $10 million of investment. And like I said, now there's 40 angel investors out there in Athens investing some of those proceeds in the next start that wants to, succeed and such.
Yeah, I appreciate those comments, and what I hear there is the investments and the partnerships with innovation and entrepreneurs in our rural communities really are a great opportunity not only to create jobs and wealth and security for our rural communities, but also future opportunities of investments and catching that entrepreneurial bug that you talked about. That's great to hear. So our colleagues across the aisle, have called for, demanding the SBA and government to come in front of us and talk to us about more government. I'm so happy that the chairman has chose to bring real people that are doing real things for our communities to come in front of us today. And so with that being said, lastly, I just want to know, Mr. Baumel, in your view and the experiences that you have on Main Street America, what can we do in Congress and on this committee to drive economic growth in rural America?
I think, as I said earlier, capital and less, less regulatory, tape around it and less barriers to that, and then partnering with the expertise, the venture capitalists, the people with experience in those areas to then deploy that and help these companies grow and keep that cycle going.
Appreciate those comments. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize Mr. Olszewski from the great state of Maryland for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses for your time today. I'm going to actually pick up, I was not planning on doing this, picking up on my colleagues' comments as we talk about the importance of the private sector, but also government. And I'll just open with a question of, for all of you, I mean, there is value in partnership. I mean, we certainly believe in the private sector, but there certainly is power and promise in having the government done right partner with the private sector. Is that something we can all agree to?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So, Mr. Chairman, I just want to say, we certainly are grateful for the ways in which you are bringing in folks who are real people leading the work out there. But I actually think that these conversations would be even more robust if we also had the leadership of SBA alongside these leaders doing the work. So, gentlemen, thank you for being here, for the work you're leading. But I'll just reinforce the point of my colleague that I think this is done best when we actually have those conversations together and collaboratively. I wanted to pick up a little bit on, Mr. Cimino, some of the comments you were talking about and this access to capital idea. I was struck by a recent statistic that says that private credit firms that are at least 50% women or minority owned hold a combined total of less than 2% of $1.6 trillion of private credit assets under management. Now, those numbers are slightly higher in private equity at just over 3% and 6% in venture capital. I'm just curious what you think those statistics say about the state of these industries or the small businesses in which they're investing.
Well, I think it's pretty clear that we've not done enough to drive more capital into the hands of these entrepreneurs. And I think that's what this committee's focused on broadening access into not only the overlooked communities, but I would say untapped. There's a huge amount of ingenuity and talent in these communities and among these segments. And so how do we actually get capital in their hands and help them build? We think about doing that through lowering barriers to entry and supporting more and more emerging managers that can be in these regions, in these communities, helping not only drive capital, but partnering to broaden it and help them grow.
That's great. I appreciate that. I mean, yeah, and according to recent data from Morgan Stanley, we could be missing out on more than $4 trillion in value by not investing in more underserved entrepreneurs. And so just for the panel, I just wanted to open it up, just sort of ideas on how we can get more capital to more places so that we can access this untapped potential.
Well, one thing I would add, you touched on women. Like my executive board is 2/3 women. I mean, the SBIC world, women are normal. That's not necessarily true in the rest of the finance and banking world and the venture world. The SBIC world has been far more opening and welcoming in that regard and supportive. Maybe that's because it's small versus big, I don't know. But we want to continue that. But ultimately, the economics will drive it. But I think as we see more women fund managers, as we see more minority fund managers, as we have more fund managers like Bill mentioned, about that are boomerangs, that are leaving the big money centers and coming back to middle America. I think we just have to make sure that we're open to everybody and being inclusive as far as like making sure that the meritocracy rises to the top, and then the good people will rise. And we're going to see good things from that.
I would like to add, for example, the National Venture Capital Association has something called the Forward program, which is looking at those that typically haven't been represented as much in venture capital and entrepreneurship. And actually myself and one of my colleagues, Faith Voinovich, were one of the initial mentors of that program. So there are programs like that being done within the venture capital community because it's more of a craft. So, mentor, teach and all that, and open up that access, which can come across demographics, as you mentioned, but also, geographics in the Midwest.
Yeah. Well, we certainly welcome the chance to work with you to bring more investment to Maryland as well. Again, thank you all for your time and your feedback today. Mr. Chairman, with that, I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize Mr. Downing from the great state of Montana for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and thank you to our witnesses for providing these testimonies. I represent Montana's 2nd Congressional District. It's one of the least populated areas of the country, about 7.6 people per square mile. And another fun stat is we've got more than twice as many cows as people. You get a lot of windshield time driving around my district, but the issues are a lot of these population centers are far apart. Far apart and isolated from a lot of these communities, and so it's hard. Having access to economic hubs, having access to capital can be difficult for small businesses and for farms and ranches. I believe we need to pay more attention to these rural capital access challenges. That's why I introduced the Expanding Access to Capital for Rural Job Creators Act earlier this year. This legislation requires the Securities and Exchange Commission's Office of the Advocate for Small Business Capital Formation to report on capital access issues faced by rural small businesses. So I'm going to start, Mr. Palmer. Do you believe the federal government, particularly under the Biden administration, has paid adequate attention to the difficulties that rural small businesses face in securing capital?
I don't think anyone has provided adequate attention to rural America. Because part of it is because there are fewer people, and it just doesn't get media coverage. I mean, I remember I was in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, and New Orleans got all the coverage, and people skipped over just what happened to Mississippi, which was just as bad or worse, because when you can't see people crying. And I think rural America has suffered from that for a long period of time. I think this hearing has been fantastic and help highlighting that. But I do think the SEC looking at that and the Small Business Advocate makes a lot of sense. I want to take a look at your legislation. I think the Muser bill helps in that regard. But there are definitely unique challenges that rural America has, whether it be broadband, whether it be infrastructure for manufacturing as far as rail lines and highway lines, employee base. There are unique challenges, but I think this is where informed public policy can help develop that. But, I think we have to be deliberate in helping rural America. It's just not going to happen magically.
Can you provide any insight into what role SBICs can play in supporting small businesses in less populated, less dense areas?
Sure. I think one of the things that states like, because Montana and Wyoming have had, and Alaska have had very few, Hawaii is another, have had very few SBIC investments. They've had a handful, but not nearly enough. I think part of that is, and this is something Bill touched on, is the cost of forming an SBIC can run north of $500,000 to form one. And if you need smaller funds in smaller markets. It'd be great if someone had a multi-billion-dollar platform in Bozeman, and like to hike in the Bob Marshall Wilderness, one of my favorite places in the world. But you need smaller funds for these smaller markets that can write smaller checks for the the transactions that these small businesses need. And I think that not losing sight of the smaller funds is important because they can serve places like Nevada and Wyoming, and that's what we need. We need some more smaller funds, not just big.
And so how do you see, or what specific advantages do you think SBICs have to provide for rural small businesses than traditional bank lending and government-issued loans?
Well, I think they do two things. One, they're a capital amplifier. So the private sector leads. It's not the government saying you shall invest this way, because it's generally not going to work. The private sector sees the opportunity. They put their money where their mouth is themselves first, and then the SBA amplifies it with the SBIC. I think that's really helpful. I think having more of these SBICs in smaller markets will be helpful, but to do that, they need to allow more smaller funds to get formed, because for a long time, they wouldn't license anyone who hadn't raised at least $25 or $30 million in a 2-to-1. That's a $90 million fund. Look, every small business would love a $10 million check. Some of them need $1 million check or a $500,000 check. And so we've got to make sure the program scales down to these smaller markets to make sure that they can be developed markets too.
So in my district, we don't have any registered SBICs. What are some ways that we can expand participation and access to these programs?
I think from Montana and Wyoming too, which is one of your neighbors who faces a similar challenge, I think bringing the banks together is the first start, because the bank up until Gramm-Leach-Bliley, most banks actually had an SBIC internally, because banks aren't allowed to take equity positions in small businesses that they weren't allowed to under Glass-Steagall. That changed with Gramm-Leach-Bliley, but SBICs used to have an internal one, so they could take some of their capital and do equity investments, the likes of which banks can't normally do. But banks are allowed to invest in SBICs, and so if we get the regional banks and also RBICs, Rural Business Investment Companies, which are done by USDA, which are our members, I think if we can get them together, I think I'd be happy to talk to you offline. I hear the tapping of the gavel.
I've run out of time. Thank you very much.
I'd be happy to talk.
Mr. Chair, I yield.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize Mr. Tran for great state of California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Palmer, in December of 2022, the Biden administration launched the Small Business Investment Company Critical Technology Initiative. This is a joint initiative between the SBA and Defense Department that utilizes the SBIC program to strengthen U.S. national security by attracting and scaling public-private investment into the DoD critical technology areas. First, are you supportive of the initiative?
Very.
And if so, can you explain why SBICs are appropriately positioned to further this initiative?
Well, a couple of reasons. One, SBICs are market-driven, and so it's not just subsidy and pumping things up. It's looking for genuine opportunities that can sustain themselves. They're geographically dispersed, where not everything else is, and they're regulated in a way that can limit foreign investors, as DoD I think sometimes needs, because one of the things that does happen is one of the ways you can do industrial spycraft, if you're a hostile foreign power, is you have your folks invest in venture funds or private equity funds, and you see what technologies are working, which ones aren't. And so I think knowing who you're doing government contracts with, or things that are adjacent to government contracts, to make sure that they're aligned with Americans' national security interest, just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and on that same note, and from a more macroeconomic perspective, can you explain the importance of continuing to utilize SBIC program to invest in critical technologies in order to compete on the global stage against foreign adversaries, including the CCP?
Yeah, I think we need to compete with everyone, but particularly these other countries are actively supporting their companies with subsidies, with industrial espionage, with all sorts of other things. We don't need to do the underhanded stuff. We just need to do the smart stuff. And the smart stuff is making sure we're putting our money where our mouth is, making sure we're supporting investing in American manufacturing, in industries that we want here that may not be manufacturing. And these aren't all government contractors. There are certain industries like AI that we need here. And I think, Bill touched on supercooling. Like these computers, you got to keep them cold, for a high-speed, transaction in certain cases. And so some of that technology and some of those research that has been done by the Department of Defense that the U.S. taxpayers already paid for, let's make sure that technology is being used for American companies to do those things, because it's already there. Let's get it in the right hands of the right Americans to make use of it.
Thank you. And, Mr. Cimino, similar question. Are you supportive of this initiative, and how do you recommend we engage further scale-up investments in critical technology, both in terms of the SBIC program and more broadly?
Yes, we do support the program and the expansion of it. This is, to, I think, your last point, this is how we actually win as a country, is continuing to double down on what works. And specifically, the private capital model is what allows this type of scale and growth. Not only does it provide that long-term patient capital, where it's going to be challenging, hard problems, but putting the capital and investment behind it to tackle it, but then it's going to be strategic partners that have the same vision in mind to ultimately build that. When you couple that with the SBIC's process on everything from licensing to oversight, it does ensure that those visions are aligned for a very not only good technological outcome, but one that benefits the country.
Thank you. And, I proudly represent California's 45th Congressional District, which is a majority-minority community where minority-owned businesses are a significant part of Orange County's local economy. But minority entrepreneurs still face numerous barriers to success, such as having a difficult time obtaining capital from external investors or lenders. According to a recent data published by Morgan Stanley, venture capital investors could be missing out on more than $4 trillion in value by not investing in more underserved communities and entrepreneurs. Mr. Cimino, wouldn't you agree that focusing more on underserved entrepreneurs and small business owners could help investors increase their returns?
100%. It would not only lead to economic activity and benefit for the specific entrepreneur and the people they employ in the community, but it would lead to a huge amount of untapped economic opportunity for those investors. And we need to do more to support that. And when we think about that, it goes down to emerging managers, which when you look at the study, minority emerging managers are 40% more likely than their counterparts to invest in underserved communities. And so really empowering them and making it easier for them to form funds and deploy capital starts to address some of that problem. Ultimately, that leads to wealth creation, attracting even more capital and supporting that ecosystem.
Thank you so much, and thank you, all the witnesses, for being here. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Back, I now recognize Ms. King-Hines from the Northern Mariana Islands for 5 minutes.
So everybody's giving a shout out to their states. I don't know if you've heard of the Northern Marianas, but I represent the Northern Marianas. And so, there's underserved and rural, and then there's the Northern Mariana Islands. We are just geographically isolated. Shipping costs are insane. And right now our economy is tanking as we speak. We have one primary economic engine, which is tourism. It hasn't recovered to pre-pandemic levels. And so, I'm here looking for opportunities for my community. Every single business in the Northern Marianas is practically a small business. And I thank you for offering your time and your ideas, because what I want to hear are your thoughts on how we can, what can the SBA do to get SBIC-backed investments working in the Marianas?
I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on some of these problems, and I do think we need to deliberately think about it. But I think this goes back to what was discussed a little bit earlier, is how do we help more fund managers, smaller fund managers with smaller checks, be identifying and supporting these areas? I know we talked a little bit about what the SEC can do on that front, but I think from an SBA and SBIC perspective, I am optimistic, and I don't think this will happen by itself, but that we can use things like their recent expansion into that fund-to-fund or reinvestor program, where you have fund managers that might be sitting in Ohio or in San Francisco, but recognize that there's opportunities elsewhere. And what they know is that they don't have the expertise, but they can start tapping into and helping smaller fund managers form, grow, and ultimately deploy that capital into these communities. It will not happen overnight, but I think the SBIC is already moving in that direction through the fund-to-fund strategy. Hopefully we can be a little bit more deliberate, not only to solve some of your problems, but to other rural areas that we've already talked about as well.
We have trouble getting investments in Hawaii because it's difficult. It's not a concentrated area. The Northern Marianas and other American territories are tough, really tough. Now I will say, again, I don't have an easy answer for you on that, or a quick answer. But one of the things that's been kicked around, both of the last administration, the Biden administration proposed a sovereign wealth fund. President Trump has proposed a sovereign wealth fund. If they do a sovereign wealth fund, and I think they are serious about doing that, but it's an if, I don't know. But if they do one, I would encourage this committee to have a separate one for small business and not have it wrapped up in the giant fund. because it's very easy for small business to sort of get crammed down and sort of forgotten about. But if you had a sovereign wealth fund, you could equitize and sort of anchor invest, funds for specific purposes to specific local needs that are unique, because I think the CNMI have unique issues. But I think, if as that idea, percolates and develops, that might be something to pay attention to. But I don't know of any easy answers to that in the short term. But I'd be happy to talk to you when we're not under a 5-minute clock.
For sure. Thank you. Did you want to chime in?
I guess I don't have, like he was saying, I don't have any easy answers. I'll just tell you, when you're going into when I've been going into emerging communities, one of the things that has to be done is really understanding kind of the core and history of that community. For example, in Ohio, there's a ton of healthcare. Nationwide Children's, Wexner Medical Center, Cincinnati Children's, Cleveland Clinic. How do we leverage that, to create new companies? Enable Injections, the on-body drug delivery, the needles from Cincinnati Children's. We have 2 biotech companies that spun out, partnered with NIH and BARDA and Carbex, and biotherapeutics and such. So I don't know enough about your community, but really looking at the community and saying, is there some history or area that we can be innovative in, within tourism or whatever it is, for software opportunities or marketplace type opportunities or what have you. So each region has its unique history and base to leverage in its own unique way. That's all I can really offer.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, and thank you for your time. I owe my time.
Lady yields back. I now recognize Mr. Latimer from the great state of New York for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our guests for being here today. I represent the coastal elites of the North Bronx, of the cities of Yonkers and Mount Vernon. And while we're on the East Coast, we have our challenges as well. And I do just want to say in general, and I take some of the comments, with a grain of humor, but America to me is one nation indivisible. And the rural parts of this nation are important, even though I don't represent them, as the urban areas are important that I do represent in the suburban areas. I've lived in the state of Pennsylvania. I've lived in the state of Ohio. I worked for a corporation in my corporate years. For 11 years, I was headquartered in Texas, and I had to return to Texas monthly to interact with people. So I see all of that together in one broad context. I must say I have not been to the Northern Mariana Islands. I don't know if my seat on Foreign Affairs will allow that, but time will tell. More specifically, though, we've talked a lot about the needs in the rural areas, which I respect, but the urban areas, too, represent an area not only of need but of potential growth. And when I talked to the people in my district this morning, I was on a Chamber of Commerce call for one of the cities that I represent. I went to one of them when I was in the district last week. I hear other issues that rise. I hear the issues about the insurity of what this tariff imposition will be and what it's going to mean to them in terms of the products that they sell. I hear about the insurity of workforce issues with the immigration policies that we have, and will they find themselves unable to properly staff up to provide the services, do the things they need to do in back-of-the-house situations. So there are other issues aside from access to capital. Access to capital is very high on that list. And just very simply, one question which I'd appreciate each of you commenting on: how do you see the challenges and the strategies necessary to incentivize small businesses in urban settings? And we know that there are large businesses. I have them in my home county. I was county executive for 7 years, well aware of those businesses and the equivalent ones that exist in Silicon Valley and so forth. But there is still an urban energy and entrepreneurship that we have to figure out how do we incentivize that. It might fall into the category of women or minority, but it may or may not. But they are in an urban environment. And so I'd appreciate your thinking on it. I'll start with Mr. Cimino, and I appreciate each of you commenting.
First, I really commend you on your comments of, I know we were all joking around, but yes, it's very much a united front here. I think to drive more capital is key, as we've discussed. But I think the other component of capital, and I completely understand your point of it's not just about capital, but when we see investment come in through private sources, they often turn into partners. And so the SEC has recently talked about businesses that accept investment from either venture or PE are 12% less likely to fail. And that's because they become strategic partners and help them think through everything from how might a government regulation need to be adhered to or navigated to how they might help with connecting them to partners, customers, the right technologies. And so we treat this very much as there's skin in the game for these businesses. I think the other component there that we've got to look to is how do we think about empowering more of the employee base to have ownership in these types of companies? Because ultimately that not only, as I said earlier in my statement, improves performance of the company itself by creating a more talented and aligned workforce, but then helps them have a stake in an economic benefit that comes out of that company and makes them even more part of that community where they're able to tap into more and more of that network.
Quickly, what we've done in some of the urban communities, downtown Cleveland, downtown Columbus, and downtown Cincinnati, is create a space for that that looks innovative, that is open, that allows collaboration and all those sorts of things. So you need some sort. It's tough walking down the street and saying, I'm just going to start a startup in downtown Columbus or in Brooklyn or such. But if you have an area that's meant for these startups to get started, to work together, to collaborate, to share stories and all that, that epicenter can really be helpful in allowing entrepreneurs to come together and grow.
Congressman, I would say that a lot of the reason why the discussion is about rural is because that's where it's missing. A huge amount of the investment by SBICs and private equity and venture is in urban. There's just a lot more economic activity and opportunity in urban areas. You have more people, you have more money around, you have more connectivity of universities and other things. So there's a lot there. And actually, as it relates to the SBICs, we have a lot of them. Forgive me for being a Long Islander. Of everything north of Harlem is upstate, but it's a. We have a lot. The bulk of the SBICs in New York are in upstate New York, in Buffalo, Albany, places not that far from you, but they're investing in places like your backyard. But I think the key thing is just making sure for urban areas, making sure that it's a vibrant, safe place. You have a lot of banks, a lot of financial institutions, keeping those chambers of commerce together to connect with the private capital markets, and they're huge advantages they have over everyone else.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now yields back. I now recognize Mr. Weed from the great state of Wisconsin for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and thank you to the witnesses who've come here today to share their experiences. Small Business Investment Companies, SBIC, with the support of the Small Business Administration, provide important capital investment to small businesses across our nation. In my district, manufacturers are a significant portion of our economy. We have over 1,000 manufacturing firms employing almost 1/4 of our working population, with 89% of those manufacturing firms in my district classified as small businesses. SBICs provide needed capital investment for manufacturers like Vehicle Security Innovators in Green Bay, which hired 6 new employees after SBIC investment. However, gaps in manufacturers' access to capital continue to exist. To help fill those important gaps, I'm proud to co-sponsor the Investing in All of America Act, which will incentivize SBICs to invest further in manufacturers in rural America, where I call Real America, Main Street, which is our district, with no new spending mandates or subsidies. So, Mr. Palmer, under Administrator Loeffler, the SBA has made revitalizing American manufacturing a top priority. So how will increasing manufacturers' access to SBIC investment help American manufacturers?
I think you have, well, first of all, thank you very much for sponsoring the bill. And yes, we have some SBIC investments in manufacturers in Appleton. Quaker Bakery Brands and others do some really interesting stuff, and you have some Century Tool companies in Green Bay and other areas. But if the more we can amplify capital, we have a lot of capital that's being raised from, let me take back a step further. The private market sees the opportunity as small business. They don't always know how to access it. And one of the things about the SBICs is they know how to access it, and they're leading with that private capital. And a lot of times, because the limits of where they are now, that capital can't be amplified because it hits the caps that SBA will do. What your legislation would do is say, hey, if you invest in a manufacturer, that cap doesn't apply to that. You still have that investment. You still have to have the same amount of private capital, which is the taxpayer protection, in front of the SBA capital, but we're not going to put an artificial brake on anything that's in a rural area or a low-income area, whether that's a rural or urban low-income area, and particularly for manufacturing and these national defense sectors. So it just lets the private capital lead without restraint. So I think it'd be very helpful. And thank you for your support.
And Mr. Baumel, my district is several hours away from large cities like Madison and Milwaukee. What can this committee do to ensure small business have access to the capital they need to grow and innovate?
I mean, we have the same situation in Ohio, where Athens is about an hour and a half drive, Dayton's about an hour drive. So I don't know specifics other than, experienced fund managers who are willing to go out there with SBIC and other type money and make that drive and such. And most people that are in these communities, like in Wisconsin, Ohio, do have that passion, to follow up. And the other thing I say is there's a lot of macroeconomic things that can be done as well. I know there's a new Developing and Empowering Our Aspiring Leaders Act coming up as well that would allow fund managers who have very limited fees. The average, early stage fund is about $20 million, about $200,000 to $400,000 annual fees to cover every expense, all the employees, the rent, and everything else. Getting the regulatory burden down with filings with the SEC, allowing these small businesses to expense R&D more quickly and those sorts of things. So there's both macroeconomic and microeconomic solutions.
Great. Thank you for all the work you do. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize Mrs. Simone from the great state of California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Williams. I appreciate you all being here today. And I would agree, before I go into my comments, I'm very interested this quarter in this committee having an opportunity to meet with and have a conversation in a hearing form with the leadership of SBA. I think we would all learn so much, particularly to understand, what the next 4 years will look like under the new SBA brass. I'm very excited about that opportunity, and I hope we get it. I'm from the great state of California, from Oakland, California, surrounding Berkeley and Emeryville and Alameda. And I got to tell you that California's 12th district is the hub. And actually, I wanted to thank many of you all for your investments in my district. Particularly, you all know that the AI revolution, the biotech revolution, it's happening right across the street from my office. And I'm proud to be in that district. There are a couple of amazing small businesses that have benefited so deeply from the private sector, from venture, that haven't had the opportunity to seek support from SBA or even the thought of obtaining NIH funding in this moment is also really, really difficult for some of these companies. I want to talk about a couple of them. There's a group called Science Corp, which is in Alameda. And Science Corp, which is a small business led by brilliant engineers and physicians and data scientists. And we believe within the next 10 years, this group will cure retinal pigmentosa and macular degeneration. The brilliant folks at Science Corp are going day in and day out, coming early and leaving late to innovate, to make sure that folks like myself with visual impairments have hope. There's another group that I visited that requires a ton of research and support for what they're doing to ensure that mothers actually live past a terminal diagnosis of breast cancer. Exelexis is right in Alameda County. Institutions like these have created opportunity, not only employment opportunities, but really deep hope for folks who are struggling with ailments and disabilities. Between 2020 and 2023, $5.8 billion was invested in Oakland entrepreneurs. And this is double what Oakland businesses received in the 3 years before the pandemic. My district sees tremendous venture capital investment. And so again, I am so thankful. But what about our underserved communities? I understand that this administration doesn't want to talk about inclusion, but I do. In this conversation, I think it's important that we continue to lift up a whole America. According to Crunchbase, venture capital funding to Black-owned businesses in the Bay Area fell 88% since 2001. Again, venture capital funding to Black-owned businesses in the Bay Area fell 88% since 2001. In fact, less than 1% of venture capital funds go to Black businesses nationwide. I'll read that again. Less than 1% of venture capital funds go to Black-led businesses nationwide. I have a question just quickly for Mr. Cimino. according to the data published by Morgan Stanley, venture capital investors could be missing out on more than $4 trillion in value by not investing in more underrepresented entrepreneurs. So the big question is, well, why? Why and how are we getting this so wrong in our economy? And wouldn't you agree that focusing more on underserved communities like the ones that I have mentioned and focusing and supporting those entrepreneurs and small businesses could help investors increase their own returns?
Absolutely. And I think that you've said it very well. This isn't about taking things away from your district. It's about bolstering that, but it's also about broadening it to more folks within your district, but also more places around the country. One of the ways we see that opportunity is by making it easier and empowering more fund managers, especially those with diverse backgrounds, because the data shows that a diverse fund manager is up to 40% more likely to invest in a diverse founder. And so to your point, that's likely to get more capital into these communities. And frankly, these are untapped talent where they're going to outperform, they're going to show that that value is not only for them and their business, but for the investors. And I think as you start to see more and more of that data, you'll start to see more of the investment community look to resource those communities.
Thank you. We're leaving genius on the table. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. I now recognize Mr. Jack from the great state of Georgia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your continued leadership in this space. And thank you to our witnesses for testifying today. Just to personalize this, my congressional district, based on some data that our team pulled together, we've got over 7,000 private equity-backed companies that provide roughly 418,000 jobs within my district, which represents about a $730 million investment within my district alone. So I'm grateful for each and every one of your testimony today because it impacts the people that I serve here in Congress. But if I could start, I also want to thank Mr. Palmer. I think your testimony is incredibly insightful, and I would love to walk through, if I could, and give you an opportunity within those policy recommendations. You've spoken to a couple of my colleagues today on it, but specifically I'd like to highlight the bill that Mr. Muser and Ms. Schulten introduced. Could you walk me through why SBIA so strongly supports passage of this bill?
Well, the program works, and that's number one. If we're not actually getting the outcomes of helping small businesses, we want to stop it. It protects the taxpayer. We don't want the taxpayer exposed to anything. That's good. There's more opportunity for more small businesses to get capital, for more businesses to innovate, and we're capped. Inflation has chewed up the leverage caps that were put in place in about 2010, 2012, that time period. And so there's more private market interest in small business, but it can't be levered. And so it's sort of capped, and we're cutting ourselves off even though we know the model works. Also, we know there are parts of America that have been forgotten for a long time and have been overlooked, and they need to be looked at. That covers manufacturing, that covers rural America, that also covers, inner city low-income areas. And so what it does is it uses a market-driven mechanism, not government mandate, but opportunity for private equity funds and venture capital funds to look at those areas and then invest in them and be able to access the SBIC leverage. So it is a market-driven incentive to get more to all of America, and that's the name of the title of the bill. It just works, and so we're excited about it.
And would you mind elaborating on one of the third policy recommendations you provided to the committee was talking about some of the fees collected as it relates to SBIC. Could you walk me through, rather expound upon that?
Sure. So there are a number of fees that are collected by the SBA on the SBICs, and some of those are effectively an insurance policy to make sure that there's no taxpayer exposure. And that's worked for 27 years, and that's good, and those should be maintained. And the other thing that they charge for licensing fees. And that's so when you apply for a license, you pay, I think, $25,000 or so. And, that folks that are coming through the process pay that fee, and then there are examination fees. But some of those funds then get diverted to other parts of the SBA instead of staying inside the SBIC program. And the SBIC program is about $11 million in total salary for $50 billion of management. I mean, normally, when you're managing in the venture world, private equity world, it's 1.5% to 2% of the assets is what you charge for a fee to run it. The government's being about 100% more effective and more efficient than that. Now, that's good to a point, but you do need to make sure you have the resources in hand to make sure that you have someone overlooking the SBICs to make sure there are no bad actors, there is no fraud. And so we want to make sure that those fees stay inside the program to make sure that we have the cops on the beat to make sure we're serving those small businesses and protecting the taxpayers simultaneously.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Cimino, you mentioned in your testimony that private capital is highly concentrated in certain areas, California, the Northeast, I think the two regions you specifically referenced. And while it's plentiful, it's clearly at times unevenly distributed. So I'm just curious, recommendations that you have to this committee as how we can attract more capital to, say, my home district or just 3rd Congressional District just southwest of Atlanta.
Yeah, it's definitely the charge that we've got before us. One, I think what the SBA's SBIC program is already doing is working. When we look at the data, about 50% of venture goes to California, but when you look at the SBIC's allocation, only 10% goes to California. And so it's already broadening capital out there, and especially enhancements that not only include the fund-to-fund piece, but accrual that fits the venture model better are helpful. And then investing in all of America, which you're obviously expert on, will, I think, add to that. I think even beyond this committee, though, there's opportunities as you think through tax around how you drive capital and talent to the ecosystem, things like qualified small business stock, but there's also some SEC-related regulations, all of which get at how do we support the investment community, because if you can support the investment community, they're more likely to invest early, locally, and diversely. That then identifies those entrepreneurs that can build companies. Those companies hire the talent. It just starts turning that flywheel of an ecosystem and building out those infrastructures.
Very well put. Thank all of our witnesses for the testimony. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize Ms. Goodlander from the great state of New Hampshire for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to our witnesses for being here today. Mr. Palmer, I wanted to thank you for your testimony. You point out that around 2,400 in the lifetime of the SBIC program, SBA has licensed many acronyms in this hearing.
It's a mouthful.
Has licensed 2,400 SBICs, small business investment companies. Mm-hmm. New Hampshire is not home to an SBIC currently.
It has one, Seacoast Capital.
All right, we've got one. What is your advice to those of us who are representing mostly rural districts, and what difference have you seen? What is the difference that's made by having more SBICs actually in our communities?
It helps. I mean, proximity matters, and if you're around people that are investing in businesses, you're more likely to be able to connect them, because this is not like the publicly traded markets where you go online and say, I'm going to my Schwab account and I'm going to find small business X and put money into them. It's a relationship business, and you have to understand what you're getting into. So having more locally is very helpful, and given the proximity to Boston, I'd like to see more funds formed in New Hampshire. And when back in the 90s, there were several SBIC funds in New Hampshire and Vermont. When they pivoted away from equity investing, it concentrated the venture world in only a couple markets, and they sort of disappeared from a lot of these smaller markets that were doing these small dollar venture funds and private equity checks. As the SBA has pivoted back to allowing more equity investing, I think you're going to see more of those develop. I think the key is, and this goes to Congressman Jack's point, is you have to make sure the barriers to entry aren't aren't too big for smaller funds to form, because bigger funds forming, they've got the resources, they've got the lawyers, they've got the compliance people, but you have to have smaller funds that can get into access these SBA products to be able to serve these smaller business in these smaller markets. And then they may not be small after a while. They may grow and grow everything around them. So it is an ecosystem matter.
Thank you for that. You also mentioned in your testimony the SBIC Critical Technologies Initiative. Mm-hmm. I serve on the House Armed Services Committee, and being on both of these committees is, I think, really important, because as I look at the U.S. economy, I see consolidation everywhere, especially when it comes to our defense industrial base. Mm-hmm. What changes can be made, and especially what more could DoD be doing to leverage this program and to really grow this incredibly important sector of our economy?
I think they're on the right track. I mean, I think the partnership between the SBA and DoD was the right move. the creation of these critical technology SBICs and this joint licensure type model they have, where the DoD doesn't license them, but they're involved in who gets the licenses to make sure we've got the right people in our national security places, makes a lot of sense. I think establishing the ones that are forming now as successes and sort of setting the market model that, hey, this works, this isn't, because when things are new, they're scary and it requires training and, hey, why am I going to build a business around this new concept? Let me see if the concept works. We've got this concept started, anchored. I think it's going to be a significant success. And as that success takes off, I think we can get more of these critical technology funds in more parts of the country. And I think it's a real opportunity. So I think it's not a pilot, it's a real established entity. But I think with a little bit of time, once those critical technology SBICs really latch into the market, I think you're going to see a lot more funds forming as them.
Well, would welcome any recommendations you have or other witnesses here today have to for how we could improve upon this program and get DoD's involvement.
Okay, I have one, going back to your original comment, I'm actually surprised there's only one SBIC in New Hampshire, because I remember I did early on a lot of investing in Boston. I actually think I flew through Southwest back out of New Hampshire. So what we've done in Ohio, one of the things...
Manchester, Boston Regional
Exactly.
Airport. Excellent airport.
Yeah, excellent airport. I mean, one of the things we've done in Ohio is talked about the quality of life versus other areas. And we've actually attracted a lot of people from Boston where, it's a little bit more simple, the house is a little bit more affordable, it's a little different quality of life. I think, as a state, I think you can do that in terms of attracting both venture capital professionals up there, as well as, companies to form there, particularly if they can have some SBICs around there. So I actually think your problem's very solvable.
And if I could just maybe add really quickly to kind of combine a little bit of the two things that were added. One, if you can grow more funds, and even on the Carta platform, there's actually 11 or 12 funds in New Hampshire. You've obviously got the proximity to Boston. Hopefully the SBIC's fund-to-fund structure can help. But it's interesting, on the DoD point, to your point, people don't like to do unproven things. We've actually had funds come to us and say, is this SBIC program itself, not even the DoD part, for real? And these are pretty prominent funds. I think the more education around this, more funds will be interested in realizing this is actually working. It's an additive process for us. And all of a sudden, they'll start thinking about how to leverage it more. And so the more education we can do about it, the better.
Well, I thank you all, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady yields back, and I'd like to thank our witnesses today for being here, for your testimony, and for appearing before us. Now, without objection, members have 5 legislative days to submit additional materials and written questions for the witnesses to the chair, which will be forwarded to the witnesses. I ask the witnesses to please respond promptly if that happens. If there's no further business without objection, the committee is adjourned. Thank you. See you. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, when do you get to head home?
I'm going to go home tomorrow.
Good for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go Cats.
Go Cats.
Are you a cat?